Georges St-Pierre versus Oscar De La Hoya. The boxing match we never knew we wanted and had no clue was being talked about has been blocked by Dana White. Yes, apparently Triller was working on doing De La Hoya versus GSP in a boxing match, and Dana White nixed that because GSP is technically still under contract with the UFC. GSP came out, confirmed the news, also said, that he would be a dream match for him. He's done everything accomplished in MMA. He's kind of closed the chapter book, but that it would have been a dream for him to fight De La Hoya in boxing, and also alluded to having some of the money go towards a charity as well. Drake, I had no clue that this fight was even being worked on. And then you've got Dana White quashing it. There's a lot to unpack here. What's your reaction to this entire situation?
Well, first of all, not really surprising that Dana would not want this to happen. GSP, despite being retired for multiple years now, still one of the biggest stars of all time. People know who he is. He's been in some movies since then. All that makes sense for him not to want that to happen. But on the other side of things, I think it's really funny how De La Hoya coming back by itself, that's funny. De La Hoya coming back is pretty funny. But then the fact that it seems like the entire goal is to have him fight an MMA fighter. Have you noticed this?
Yeah.
Originally they were looking at Pettis, according to Pettis' side of things. And then Eddie Alvarez seemed like a possible guy that was brought up. There might have been some others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Those were the ones that were most stood out. And now GSP apparently in the mix. Like it's very funny. And to think turning down Pettis, apparently, according to Pettis' side, and then being okay with GSP, just in terms of like size and skill, still, despite GSP being retired, it's like he's the better guy, just historically and all that. It's just such an entirely funny concept. Oscar coming back by itself, and then the odd intrigue and persistence with wanting it to be against an MMA fighter, which I guess makes sense because they're not actually boxers, but the names he's throwing out there are still all guys that should probably beat a 7-year-old Oscar De La Hoya who hasn't boxed since like 2009-ish, right? Like you would think these guys that we're mentioning here.
Yeah, I mean, you would think if Artem Lobov could beat Paulie Maggiani, and I'm butchering that. I'm not going to try it. If you think he'd be Paulie, you wonder if Pettis or GSP could outbox De La Hoya. And it's interesting. I feel like GSP at least makes sense to me, right, from a business aspect, right? Like, even if De La Hoya loses, that's a huge fight. You get GSP fighting again, you're going to have a bunch of eyes on it. You're going to make a ridiculous amount of money, which I also feel like has to be why Oscar is doing this. Right. I feel like between, Golden Boy Promotions just being a complete awful scenario, as well as some other things he's been trying to doing, I feel like this is really what it comes down to, is a classic, like, hey, I need some money, I'm going to go back and fight again. But this is not Mayweather too, right? Like, as you bring up, De La Hoya is 47, hasn't fought since 2009. And, he's not Mayweather, who was undefeated and, yes, older, a little bit, way past his prime, but still competing in there actively, at least every couple of years, at least doing training, things like that. This is a full-on return. I think in pure boxing, he would still have an advantage over some of these guys. I mean,
well, he's a lot smaller than GSP, isn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, comes down to, yeah, right.
And he's clearly got some recreational problems as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, money, right? Where does it go? But yeah, it's one of those things where maybe he believes he can outpoint GSP, right? If GSP can't knock him out, then maybe could outpoint him just from a pure box standpoint, and it's possible. Who knows? But the main thing I want to focus on here, again, as you brought up, is Dana White just quashing this, just saying, nope, not going to happen. We always talk about fight pay and contracts and things of that nature. And if you watch the Fight Business podcast, I've kept everyone up to date in terms of the, business world of MMA, specifically the UFC and everything they've been going through lately with Endeavor buying them out, Endeavor going public, all of that stuff. But this right here just highlights just such a ridiculous point where GSP is not even trying to fight MMA, right? Or compete in MMA. He's hasn't fought since beating Bisping and has basically said, I'm retired. He's 40 now, or right
Today
about
or
40.
yesterday?
Yesterday
was
yeah.
his birthday.
Yeah. So 40 now. And yet Dana can just go ahead and say, no, you can't go off and do a fun, goofy boxing match with De La Hoya because I own the rights to any, not just MMA, but any combat sport that you participate in perpetuity. If this happens 5 years from now, Dana can do the same thing. Nah, I don't feel like it. Sorry, you're not doing it. And that just highlights the power the UFC has over fighters and in terms of their contracts. And there's nothing GSP can do other than take it to court and challenge it, which from what I've seen from, people like Jason Cruz and some of our other, lawyer friends, he might actually pull off and win, but that's a ton of time. That's a ton of money. And you'd also be having
For this.
Yeah, exactly. For this. And you'd have the full force of the UFC behind it, because if GSP were to get out of that contract and set a precedent, it would be terrible for the organization. Because then you're looking at Brock Lesnar. Then you're looking at, McGregor when he eventually tires. Then you're looking at John Jones looking to try and do other things. It would cause a shitstorm. So it's just, crazy that they have that much power over fighter contracts and that people are just now realizing it. Because this is something that, the antitrust lawsuit has brought up back in 2015 was a huge point of it is this is how they have monopoly power is you end up getting in the top 5, top 10 ranked in the world. They extend your contract for 5 or 6 fights. You become a champion. They extend it indefinitely. If you're a champion, you can never leave the UFC while you have the belt pretty much. And then if you decide to retire, that's fine. We just freeze your contract and that's that. Not even WWE has this type of stuff. And WWE has terrible contracts. So
CM Punk left with the title.
He left with the title. Man.
He was going to.
Yeah, he was. That's true. That's true. That's a good point. But point is, this whole thing is just outrageous. And I don't know. Let me ask you this, Drake. Would you have wanted to see this fight? Because I am torn about that. If let's say Dana says, "Yep, you're all good," and we get this fight, would you have actually wanted to see this circus?
No. No. I mean, you're just asking me that for this video. Pat knows the answer. You guys, I don't care whatsoever about this. I don't care about boxing in general, right? So I definitely don't care about the nonsense that we are getting these days. Of course, I do have a little bit of curiosity just because these are MMA related guys. So I'm like, I just have that thought in my mind, like, please don't look bad out there. So Ben Askren really let me down in that regard. But that's about as far as it goes for me. But yeah, man, it's very interesting. The whole preventing people from doing what they want to despite being out for years kind of thing, which has been the case for forever, right? So it's extra funny too, and comical looking back at the sillier sides of this whole thing, how just at this last press conference after UFC 262, Dana gets on the stage, right, and he's talking to the media, as he does after every event, unless something bad happens and he just doesn't want to talk to us. He very adamantly talked about how he doesn't care about the Triller guys. They could do whatever they want and fucking leave me alone, like all this stuff. He said he doesn't want to talk about him, but then he talks about him for like 2.5 minutes, nearly 5. Just goes on a little mini rant. Well, clearly this would indicate that kind of cares. If you care enough to not let them have somebody who's not even competing for you right now. So that's kind of funny to me, right? And you talk about the ripple effect that this would have if GSP really pursued it and fought it. And then you mentioned guys like Brock, John Jones, guys who are characters in their own way, and Brock definitely a guy who likes to do whatever he damn well pleases and can pretty much get away with it at this point. You have to think though, with somebody to circle to John, who's in this very unique position he's in right now. I think we'll see it at some point. It might not be with GSP because, again, this is something that really doesn't really matter. Like, just a for fun, silly thing. He said the charity stuff about it, right? And it would just be a dream because Oscar was one of his favorite fighters. It's not something he wants to do out of a competitive, I'll show you I'm the best kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have gotten to boxing rather than MMA. That's who he is. So when you look at it from that side of things, with these guys and kind of as time goes on, because MMA is still very new, as we always have to remind people, I think eventually we will see this kind of thing fought out. And again, I didn't even mention Connor, as you mentioned there. That very well could be a guy who, by that point, who knows if we're getting to it, where he just can't seem to maybe get wins in the UFC anymore against at least the top guys. Not to say he's there yet, but if we are on that snowball's path where, if he loses to Poirier again and just who knows where it goes from there, surely he might want out. UFC letting him go? Doubt it. Doubt it. No way. So.
No, and you got to wonder too. I'm curious if my guess is that Triller did not reach out to Dana about doing a co-promotion similar to what they did with Floyd and McGregor, right? Like, Dana's all about doing boxing. Dana's first love was boxing. He talks about it all the time. You were going to have Zuffa boxing, but then he couldn't, get the type of pay structure he wanted, is what it sounded like. And so he kind of abandoned that. But it's one of those things where, Dana's totally fine with GSP boxing or Connor boxing as long as he gets a huge chunk of the profits and the UFC gets the pay. And I think you're right in that. I think Dana's smart enough to know, because I think he realized that with Mayweather and McGregor, that he, in a situation like that, he'll acquiesce with a very big star as long as he co-promotes, and he'll treat that more as a co-promotion. But I do believe that at some point somebody will try and fight this, whether that's John Jones or McGregor. I think you're right, where it will be too tempting, because the fact of the matter is, and I just had this debate with somebody in the YouTube comments of one of my podcasts, is yes, the median pay and lower tier pay for MMA fighters is higher than boxing. But once you get into the upper echelon, it's 10, 20, 30 times what an MMA fighter would make. Deontay Wilder money is what apparently Dana White won't give John Jones to fight, Francis Ngannou. And he said, I want half that. And that's still too much. Yeah, there you go. So it's inevitable, especially when you have Ben Askren making more money than he probably made if he had negotiated pay-per-view points. That's on him, though. That was his mistake. Would have been making more money than he ever did in MMA. He definitely, even just that guaranteed payout he got for fighting Jake Paul was higher than he made over his base salary from what we know from his last couple fights in the UFC. So, why would I not go fight Oscar De La Hoya and make significantly more money than I would coming back fighting Habib or Usman or a bigger name in MMA? That's a much more dangerous opponent. It blows my mind, Drake. I have no idea why somebody would do that. So,
yeah, it's just a whole bunch of silliness. It's just when you break it down to the science of the behind the scenes things and how it all works. It's just a matter of time, I think, as it is with most things in life. But again, circling back to how young MMA still is and figuring out things, not even pay related things, but even rule issues. Like, there's still so much work that needs to be done in a lot of areas. So, these next coming 20, 30 years are going to be very fascinating, I think. I mean, I think that we will definitely see some big changes. I have no idea which part of, those 3 decades we would see them, but it's just lining up to where, you can only tolerate so much for so long, right? And everybody wants a fair shake. And the more sample size you have to look at things and be like, well, that's not right. I mean, Spencer Fisher, what happened with him? Like, you have so many more examples as we have more to look at. So again, I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and especially as the stars become bigger, you get, more
Right.
McGregors and that type of scenario where they truly realize just how much money is being left on the table or how much they're not getting. I think that's you're exactly right. Eventually, the right combination will come along and will challenge this. And where it goes, that's really probably going to end up in court or in, you know, some type of new negotiations or some new business model. But who knows on that? Yeah, I'm very curious to see where it all goes. And I agree. The next 20, 30 years are going to be kind of crucial for it. So we'll be here for it. We'll be old men, but
Yes.
we'll be here for it. So
well, you'll be
let
an
us know
older man.
Yeah, that's true. I'm already an old man. Good point. I might not be here for it. So let us know in the comments what you think of this whole situation. Are you surprised that, you know, this fight was even being talked about? Is this a fight you would have loved to see? Are you like Drake and me, where we kind of would have been like, this is a spectacle, but I could go either way with it? Are you surprised and shocked that Dana, you know, just said nope and nixed this whole thing from the get-go? Do you think Dana should have that ability? Let us know your thoughts and comments on all of this, as always. And make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification. And yeah, I say, you know, bring back UFC 1, man. They got it right the first time. Let's, you know, if you're coming on, come on.